start by saying that human beings can't help but tell stories about themselves. So even when we are not, even unconsciously, we are often our behaviors and how we think about the world, and all of these things shape who we are. You started by this program by talking about identity. So our identity is shaped. So one of the things that I always say is that you are, and you're not your story. And what narrative coaching does is to try and peel away the way we story ourselves, and how these stories, or the way we see ourselves, or the way we see the world, how they're serving us. This transition hard, and her friends, stroke previous ex-peers, now team members, were finding this transition hard to deal with, because have they lost their friend now? But we don't have to be stuck with a particular story we tell. And there's something about this is not some positive spin on storytelling. This is much more about really unraveling and reframing.
Welcome to EI Cafe with Azeem, in which he reflects on key aspects of life and business through the lens of emotional intelligence. You will learn how emotional intelligence can be used for your success in both personal and professional lives. The podcasts cover topics on leadership, collaboration, culture, building a positive mindset, and even raising kids. You will hear key life lessons and tips from the most prominent personalities, business leaders, entrepreneurs, EI practitioners, and executive coaches from around the world. So sit back, relax with a cup of coffee as we get into today's show, EI Cafe with Azeem.
Life goes through different phases and can have interruptions. And these interrupting stories refer to a significant, often unexpected events or experience that disrupt an individual's usual narrative. These events challenge existing beliefs and behaviors, prompting reflection and potential transformation. Such stories can lead to a profound personal growth and redefine the sense of identity and purpose, helping individuals understand and reshape their own personal stories can facilitate growth and change. By exploring the narratives they can tell about themselves and the experiences, clients can uncover limiting beliefs and patterns and develop new empowering stories that align with their goals and values. Greetings to you from Colombo, Sri Lanka. This is EI Cafe with Azeem Season 11, and I'm your host, Azeem Saheer, a human capital specialist and Lego Serious Play facilitator, ICF certified pieces level coach, an emotional intelligence and emotional culture tech practitioner. I'm one of the lead facilitators at Luminary Learning Solutions. This weekly show helps you to explore the impact of emotional intelligence on our lives through the engaging conversation with industry leaders, innovators, executive coaches, and thought leaders. We aim to inspire and empower you. Today is this episode in EI Cafe, where we explore building resilience through narrative coaching, stories of navigating life-interrupted stories. Life can throw unexpected challenges our way, disrupting our plans and altering our course. This interruption can be daunting, but they can also present unique opportunity for growth and transformation. To have this conversation, I have a fantastic lady in the room. And my guest today is, let me introduce her. My guest today is Dr. Mihirini de Zoysa, a leadership coach and a facilitator with over 25 years of experience of working with leaders and teams in organization, guiding them to develop their skills in leadership and life, supporting those navigating transition and transformation personally, professionally, and organizationally is a focus in her work. Being no stranger to the challenges, uncertainty, and chaos, her personal experience inform her work. She is a scholar practitioner with doctorate in organizational change and from Ashridge, Hull and Middlesex University, UK, MSc in Responsibility and Business Practices from the University of Bath, UK, and the BSc in Economics from the University of London, UK. Mihirini is an Ashridge Hull certified coach. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Mihirini de Zoysa. Welcome to the cafe.
Thank you very much, Azeem. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
All right. So first and foremost, I mean, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. I know we met at the ICF Colombo chapter event, and that inspired me. Yeah, why not narrative stories and coaching? Why not let me explore also? So that led my curiosity and start searching a lot of on the context, and I saw a lot of synergy in the work I do. I thought, why not? Because there are a lot of stories untold. There are a lot of stories within us. We are really not capitalizing it. There are a lot of stories that can really transform our lives, which we are not really looking at it. So on that note, I would like to, with curiosity, I would like to ask, just to understand what this narrative and what this story can really build into a human element to build resilience. How it would be a good start for that conversation?
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to start. So I want to just start by saying that human beings can't help but tell stories about themselves. So even when we are not, even unconsciously, we are often our behaviors and how we think about the world and how we respond to the world is often shaped and fashioned by the way we understand the world. And that comes from the time we are small, when we are growing up. We interpret the world through the way our parents, our caregivers tell us who we are. And we, socially, culturally, even our education, all of these things shape who we are. You started by this program by talking about identity. So our identity is shaped. So one of the things that I always say is that you are, and you're not your story. So it is both of them. And what narrative coaching does is to try and peel away the way we story ourselves and how these stories or the way we see ourselves or the way we see the world, how they're serving us. Sometimes it does serve us in a particular way at different stages in our life. But as we go through certain life experiences and life's changes, some of the old stories of how we think of ourselves might no longer serve us. And what narrative coaching does is to try and peel away those layers in a way that empowers the client to choose the story. So not react to the word, but respond. So there's a choice, looking at choices.
So here what I got it, like there can be stories which can be very useful to us. There can be stories which cannot really help us to move forward. Am I correct? Am I here?
Yeah, so sometimes we get stuck in a story.
Yeah, there you go.
We get stuck in an identity. And those identities and the stories were useful to us. They, maybe they were part of our coping mechanism. And maybe they held true at a particular time. But when other things come our way, so that's why I talk about kind of, when we're transitioning or you have a life interrupted or a chaos story come, those things may no longer apply. We have to now see ourselves in a new light. And this is hard sometimes. And that's what narrative coaching tries to do, to help you navigate that path.
All right. So what I just heard that any negative experience in our life, sort of a story, um, cannot be used in terms of really, bring that resilience piece, or did I hear it correct?
No, not necessarily. Well, we can't. So I'm going to. There are events that happen
Uh-huh.
that we can't change. Some of those
Right.
events we can't change. We are not in control of some of the things that happen to us.
Mm,
But we have some choice in the way we interpret it. But we will
mm,
interpret the events based on the way we see the world, our event, our lens.
mm,
So
mm,
sometimes it's really about expanding your lenses or putting on new lenses to see
mm.
how we might interpret. We are meaning makers. We cannot help but give meaning to things.
Right.
Um,
Can I invite you, Dr. Mihirini, to just give a small example on the context for the benefit of our listeners and viewers? The moment we start talking, they might be thinking like, okay, what is this? Azeem is asking these ladies some questions which we are not getting in. Would an example can really help us? What do you think
yeah.
about that
So
context?
yeah, that sounds good. So I'll just take something from, so I'm working with somebody who was telling me today they've been in the organization for a long time. They've risen up the ranks and uh, they've been recognized for their efforts, the skills they bring to the table, and they've been now promoted to a fairly senior leadership position.
Mm, mm,
And this leader is somebody who's built their networks and friendships in the organization. When you've
mm.
been there for 20 years, you do that.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, your identity now changes because your friends who were your peers are now people who report to you.
Mm,
And was finding this transition hard, and her friends, stroke previous ex peers, now team members, were finding this transition hard to deal with because have they lost their friend, now they've become a boss, and her time availability has changed
mm,
because now so this is a identity not just for the leader but for her friends, her team members, and the organization.
mm.
So this is a transition. So it's not a, when I talked earlier about a life interrupted,
Yeah.
was more like a chaos story, but this also is for the friends. This may be a life interrupter story. They,
Mm,
all in one team, and suddenly one of the team members has now been elevated,
mm,
completely
mm,
changes the dynamic. So
mm,
everybody now has to shift.
mm.
Um, so how do you now renegotiate relationships,
Wow.
renegotiate identities,
Mm,
um, reframe how they relate to each other, how they spend time,
mm.
how they give each other feedback now has changed, right? Those days you might say something in the lunchroom. Now it may happen in a performance review.
Mm.
So all that is a big change.
Right. I think that's in a very real time context in a corporate world, right? Happens and nobody expect. Suddenly, me and you are very good friends. Suddenly, you get promoted. I look like, okay, now how should I call? Should I call some ma'am or should I call? So I think that makes lot sense in terms of that particular transition. Now let me refocus to the whole element of interruption, right?
Mm.
I think this is I really want to really focus because um, as coaches, as leaders, me and you as human beings, we go through different life cycles and we do face different life interruptions. Now, how and what is like this life interrupted stories, and how can we really deal with in such stories? What's your thought?
Yeah, so Life Interrupted is, it's so Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, he talks about the story arc. Any movie, you have somebody just walking along, everything's fine, and then suddenly a crisis or something happens, and suddenly your life changes. So that's this big moment. I mean, it can happen, good things can be life interruptions, or the chaos story
Mm, mm,
is where the life you planned has
mm,
changed. And it has completely, the idea of who you were, who you thought your life, what you thought your life was going to be, has completely changed. I mean, we can think about it in larger scale. The pandemic was a life interruption.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Never before experienced. For us, the economic crisis was a life interruption. And I mean, all of us, I mean, I think if you live long enough, you will go through life interruptions. Some of them, they might come. Even if they might come, you might not be ready for them. And some of them are so not in your view that it completely takes you by surprise. So I've been through something similar, and I have been through more than one, and probably will go through many more. So that ability to cope with those life interruptions and hold yourself in those moments is you have to almost rejig what the world means, what your beliefs are, what your values are, what's priority. All that changes in a life interruption moment.
So I hear two aspects of it, right? One, we talked about the life interruption that can be really, really positive experience for us, really can boost us. The moment the moment we reflect about those stories, we get goosebumps and keep driving. And at the same time, there can be life interrupted moments which can really pull us down. Now, if I take the second part of it, I'm curious to know, is that a trauma that we are holding into it?
Well, sometimes it is traumatic, and some of those traumas are not things we can easily get over. Some of them, I mean, my husband died 4 years ago, and that was a life interruption. We were, planning a wedding, and the next minute he was diagnosed with cancer. So, to wrap your head around, next month we are hoping to get married, and then, now we are, leaving the country for treatment. You can't even begin to at that moment kind of, comprehend what's going on. There's too much going on. And the point of, these kinds of, I mean, at that moment, you're not trying to coach yourself or, you're just going through the motions, and different people respond to these events differently. And each one of us may have our ways of responding. And it's hard to say, because they're not moments that we always prepare for. We are not preparing for your partner to die. Maybe if I'm 70, then I know I or he or, people around me are going to die. But when you're in your 40s, you're not expecting that. So you sometimes don't know how you're going to respond till you're faced with that situation. So that's a kind of a life interruption or a chaos story. Everything just falls apart.
Right. I think you're bringing into a right particular area in terms of when we talk about life interrupted stories and how this narrative part connects. I'm just curious, like I'm just trying to figure it out because I always think on an EI component, emotional intelligence component.
Yeah.
Now you said about respond, how you respond. Now it's very rare that people really understand respond, but we always react to that particular situation. How does this emotional intelligence piece comes into this particular narrative coaching component?
Yeah, so I think the reaction is also physiological. So, how when we are faced with a crisis, we have an age-old, we are the chemicals in our body, like we pump adrenaline. We talk about the fear, the flight, fight, freeze response. That's a reaction. That's coming from that's an age-old response. And sometimes you might not be able to immediately help but react. Fear. I remember what it felt like in those moments when I first knew it. And, so I know like in crisis, I become quite calm. It's almost like, right, I've got like, because I want to look at what can I control. So that I know now is a way that I respond generally, more often than not. Some people might, and that's not a good or bad thing. It's just the way I do it. But that may mean me not paying attention to what's going on for me. I'm just responding to the crisis. So the response is, if I were to now kind of link it to our what we're talking about, narrative coaching. So I'll give an example from a personal example. So when my husband's name was Tony, and I immediately went into a caregiver mode because it was very, very hard right from the bat. From the moment he was diagnosed at at stage 4 colon cancer, which had spread to the liver. We immediately went into surgery. It was a very hard 11 months, and I was his only primary carer. And we've had surgeries, then somewhere about, I want to say, few weeks or, and I'm like on high alert. Like you sleep only 1.5 hours at a time. You're constantly running on this adrenaline. We had a conversation. Our roles had changed. We were no longer partners or lovers. He was a patient. I was a caregiver. And it had changed the dynamics in our relationship. And we, in a moment of calm, we talked about what we missed. And so that we had to so that was us once there were not always moments of calm, but at some moment he and I had this conversation, and I confessed to him that I was on such high alert that I asked him, because I'm constantly watching. So this is me reacting all the time. I said, I'm constantly watching, is there fever? What's going on? Has he had his food? How is that reacting? I said, I was finding it hard to leave that role. And I invited him to tell me when he was okay, and for him to make the move for us to shift back into, so that I could retrain almost to see him as my partner, as my lover, as, as my, as another human being, not just as a patient. So that's kind of, in these moments, we all go into, so that would be a small but good example of having going from reaction to response,
Absolutely. I think that we go through that particular cycle because the moment the whole thought process into your front cortex, that's the moment we realize, right? But that whole space is something we really need to take care. Before I move to the next question, I'm just curious to ask, as you shared your example. Man.
No, I wanted to add, in terms of emotional intelligence you asked about, and something that came to mind was your ability to, the emotional agility you need. So this was demonstrating some kind of, I didn't immediately have the self-awareness to say, okay, I'm constantly in crisis mode. And he had, because I didn't know when he was feeling okay, I'm constantly, so that ability to kind of shift, and not be constantly in fear mode or crisis mode or panic mode or looking after mode is the emotional agility. Sorry, Azeem, you was going to say something, and I
actually you answered my question.
Okay.
No, I was asking at that moment when you're all over the place, physically and mentally, how much your well-being was affected? Because this is what you don't realize. My observation, maybe, like when people get into that particular whole stay situation, sometimes we forgive our well-being, we forgive our forgo our health. How did it impact you on that particular? Because that's why the emotional agility part I want to bring in.
I want to say during that 11 months, which is why I also think, when people said, oh, you're so amazing, and, you're this 24/7, I didn't, and I still don't see it like that. I was like, what are my options? For me, my view of the world was I had some, because there were lots of reasons that we had limited options. Because when we moved to England, I didn't have a care support system that I would have had normally had in Colombo. So I thought, well, either I just fall apart and fall on the, just fall apart, or I just rise to this. I just do what needs to be done. So, I've reflected on that 11 months. Not once did I get a cold, because if I did, that would affect him. However, I did have some other issues that came up, which was also probably a stress response, but was for a few weeks. And only after he died, for about 1.5 to 2 years, I couldn't fall asleep, because I had got so used to sleeping in this high alert mode. Now, I don't know what physiologically that has done to me, or will show up, or we don't know this. All I know is that the body learned to cope, but it must have some there must be a fallout at some different level, and I don't know. I lost a lot of hair, but so that's, I don't think I looked after myself in that way, because that didn't feel like an option.
I think we all go through that when that particular incident happens. I have personally gone through certain things. Sometimes we forget ourselves and really look back. I think I missed a lot, right? And now let's come to the context of, in terms of, as a coach, how do you really help your client this life interrupted moments? I know you just explained how the whole piece is about. What sort of a mechanism? How do you really use that particular stories to really bring that resilience up?
So I think it's, especially if somebody is coming at this kind of big life change, I think the first thing as a coach, rather than talk about a method, I want to talk about presence, is to be just totally present to their experience of the event. I can't, look at their experience and think, oh, this is how I handled it. Or, we have to completely suspend any judgment. It doesn't mean that we may not have a view, but it means suspending all of that so that we can be fully present to their experience. And we have to treat their experience as being true for them. I think as a coach, what you're trying to find out is, what is it about the way they see the world, the way their history, their personal, familial, cultural history, how has it shaped them to have this particular way of experiencing? And then where is the tension? What's going on for them right now as a result of this way of experiencing this event? So that's what we are, just completely sitting in that moment with the client. We have to treat the person's experience as being absolutely true. It is for them. And then helping them see little moments of when there may be other ways of responding, other things that they have not paid attention to. So that they can then from that build, it's like a restorative narrative. You have to build a restorative narrative. You kind of, when you have a life interruption, you have to now rebuild yourself, the world, the way you may have thought, well, if you thought God existed before, you might think, well, there is no God, and that may be okay for them to go forward. Or that may really hurt them to go forward with that belief, because that's very much a core part of who they are. So how do you come to terms with these different things?
Interesting. Very interesting way, the way we look at that particular component. Because the moment life interruption comes, we always think down, right? Look down. That's how it has been. As a coach, I think it's important to help them to really raise their head up and see around. That's the point I just sense from the whole statement. No, Dr. Mihirini, we are coming to this last part of the conversation, and I'm just curious. I just want to connect to the context of a leadership element, how can a leader really utilize this whole piece of narrative coaching into that particular? Because again, that's also the people related, performance impacted, because we speak a lot of in terms of a corporate context. What is your thought as in terms of a leadership role, how this can be very useful?
Yeah, so I mean, as a leader, this is hugely important because you are working with many people as peers, as colleagues, as team members, who people who report to you. And everybody responds differently to the same event. Let's say there is a sudden, there is an extra amount of work, or the organization is going through a crunch. Some people will like, let's take this challenge. Some people will not. Or you introduce a new system, for example. Let's take, okay, no need of crisis. You introduce a new system, it might feel like a life interrupted moment for some people because they're used to doing certain in a certain way. So if you're going through a change management process, to be able to understand people's behaviors and even at individual level, to help them navigate this change, so that means you have to understand. So if somebody says this system doesn't work, you have to sit and find out what worked in the earlier system. That are they missing? Is it an actual function, or is it a feeling of comfort? So you're actually having to spend the time to get to know the other person's worldview, what their experience of it is like.
So it's more in terms of the empathy and compassion sort of element comes in the message. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Empathy, compassion, patience. And sometimes we have very little time for these when crises happen. But if you're through planned changes, or, you'll have to take the time to, if everybody is to get on board with some of these changes, or as leaders, you want people to demonstrate certain skills or bring in a certain performance. You have to find out what makes them tick, right? And when that's such a, what makes them tick, as in how are they shaped? How are they fashioned? What motivates them also comes from those things.
All right. Exciting. So before I let you go, right? So I just want to ask from you, what would be a good key takeaway or a message or a tip you want to give to our audience and viewers who's listening this episode and watching this episode?
Something that I didn't touch on, but so one is that you are and you're not your story, is like something that's quite, that we are fashioned by them, but we don't have to be stuck with the particular story we tell. And there's something about this is not some positive spin on storytelling. This is much more about really unraveling and reframing in a way that's real to you and in a way that's sustainable to you, in a way that serves you.
Brilliant. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, that's the time what we have, and that's a wrap for our discussion on the importance of life interrupted situations and how this piece of narrative coaching can really come in. My big shout out and my heartfelt gratitude to our guest today, Dr.Mihirini de Zoysa, lead coach and MD, for such valuable input. I know 30 minutes is not enough, Dr. Mihirini, to discuss this, but I just want to give the flavor of it. Of course, it's not stopping our viewers and the listeners to reach out to her. Really, please feel free to get connected on LinkedIn. She's really available and she's very helpful and put out some amazing content. At the same time, you can, of course, get connected, log on to her website, www.mihirini.net. You can explore full service. And of course, she writes a lot of articles and blogs as well. Yeah, I love to listen more stories in terms of it. So on that note, Dr. Mihirini de Zoysa, thank you very much for your whole time and being so, giving some amazing content, because I think this is something new Sri Lanka is going to experience. I think this is available around the world. And this is what my objective of this podcast, let people know what's something out there which we can use into our personal life and to become more resilient. So on that note, Dr. Mihirini de Zoysa, thank you very much and wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much, Azeem. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you for giving this opportunity to reach your listeners. And all the very best. Thanks a lot, Azeem. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of EI Cafe with Azeem. You can check out similar topics in episode 105, Resilience in Change, Strategies for Effective Change Management in Uncertain Time with Dr. Nada Al-Musa. Episode number 86, Power of Stories and How to Make an Impact with It with David D. Dwyer. Episode number 57, Creating a Culture of Coaching and Development Using Emotional Intelligence with Dr. Richard Patsis. Episode number 47, Emotional Burnout and Its Impact on Employee Performance with Melissa Karan. I hope this conversation helps you in your professional as well as personal life. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, stay inspired and keep striving for excellence. This is EI Cafe with Azeem, checking out from the cafe. My name is Azeem Saheer.
Thank you for joining yet another successful episode of EI Cafe with Azeem. We appreciate your time and invite you to subscribe to the show so that you don't miss out on the next episode. Write a review and even rate it if you please. You can also follow Azeem Saheer on social media. We would also love to hear from you on what topics you'd like us to cover and even who you'd like us to invite to the show. We wish you well until we meet again on another episode of EI Cafe with Azeem.